afternoon to everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to the 2026 Senior Studio Art Panel. My name is Thuvia. I am the Associate Curator of Education here at the Rollins Museum of Art, and today I'll be serving as the moderator for the discussion. This is the first in a two-part series featuring the graduating class of studio art students at Rollins College. I hope that everyone has had the opportunity to view the works that are on view as part of this exhibition, which is entitled Flux. The exhibition showcases the work of the talented artists that I am joined by today. We'll begin with a discussion, which includes several questions that the students have all prepared some answers for, and then we'll be inviting questions from the audience as well towards the last 10 to 15 minutes of the program. For those of you who are joining us virtually, I want to encourage you to also share any questions or comments in the chat, and our staff will be sharing those with us towards the end of the program as well. To kick things off, I want to go ahead and invite each of these artists to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Okay. Hi. I am Brianne. I am a double major in studio art and computer science.
I'm Capernia McCarthy, and I am a studio art major and an art history minor.
Hi, my name is August. I'm a double major in art history and studio art, minoring in sexuality, women, and gender studies.
Hi, I'm Jules St. John. I'm a major in studio art, and was formerly a minor in archaeology. Yes.
Great, fantastic. Thank you all so much for being here today. The final Read exhibition of senior work is the result of a very rigorous and year-long process that begins with a portfolio review in the junior year. Throughout their senior year, the artists develop concepts and technical skills under the guidance of the studio art faculty, including Rachel Simmons, Audrey Pope, Don Rowe, and Don Hargrove. The students also participate in regular critiques with their peers, other members of faculty, and museum staff, notably the museum's curator, Dr. Camilla Carbonell, and the museum's collection and exhibition manager, Alfond. In the fall, the students exhibit their work at the Cornell Fine Arts Center, which is the building right next to the museum. And many of the projects that are featured during the exhibition are then expanded and refined into what you can now see on your shelf. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. And to start us off, I want to invite the students to talk about the journey to this point and what led up to the work that we can now see here. So when you all look back on what you had initially proposed during your junior portfolio review, and then that pop-up exhibition in November, how would you say that your artistic process and style evolved over the last year? We'll go ahead and start with Brianne.
Yeah, so I changed a lot, definitely as an artist, from like the original proposal time to where we are now. I originally was not going to be an art major. I decided about like halfway through the fall semester that was what I wanted to do. I had been a minor up until that point, but then changed right before the junior portfolio review to make it a major. And you don't do that if you're a minor, so that was kind of a fun little adventure. And that kind of had an interesting impact because I hadn't really had a defined style up until that point. I had kind of just been doing whatever needed to be done for whatever classes I was in. So there wasn't a through line, and I kind of had to find that for this project. So where that kind of put me with is I actually started with working small because I liked a lot of miniature stuff. Excuse me. I had done a lot of like diorama work, and I kind of thought that was where I would go. But through more exploration, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So then I was like, oh, I'm a computer science person. I'll work digitally, because I kind of decided I wanted to work maybe on different scales. And digitally, you can play around with the scales a lot more. And then over the summer, I couldn't access a lot of stuff. I worked at a summer camp up in the mountains and ended up doing a lot of very large sculptural work. and kind of found that that was what I wanted to do, was to kind of keep working with large sculptural works, which then ended up with me doing more found object works as the semester kind of went on, and then just kind of building that throughout the whole semester for me. So yeah, that was kind of my process of testing and experimenting and seeing kind of where I ended up being.
Yeah, for me, I would say my focus has changed quite a bit, but the core of my work has remained relatively the same. Originally coming into the JPR, I remember I wanted to experiment with plastic. I was really interested in doing like dioramas, but even from the start, I knew I wanted to kind of rely on my strength, which is more illustration, with like markers and pencils and those kind of materials. And coming in, I always knew I wanted to do work with the environment, with Florida wildlife. But even originally, I knew I kind of wanted to do work with overlooked species such as snails and fish. I kind of changed directions along the way. I'm still doing overlooked species, but I chose to do the mink and the deer instead, simply because it was a little easier to talk about. And I did run into some limitations along the way, which, especially with the panther, it became more difficult, particularly because of the size of it. It's very large, and it took a lot of time. But I really enjoyed doing this illustration work. And at some point, I want to do something with like paper puppets. And you can see that with the deer, where I had like little brads on the like overlapping pieces of paper. And along the way, I kind of shifted from this idea just because of the logistics and size of the panther. And yeah.
So for my work, I started off wanting to do large, like mainly textile-based pieces, like quilted pieces during my JPR. So I came into the summer research project thinking that would be the direction I went, but I ended up not having access to my sewing machine. So instead, I sort of explored collage and painting, and that ended up being what I found a lot of interest in, and I was really enjoying the process of that. And then for the fall exhibition, I was taking a printmaking class with Rachel, and I just absolutely fell in love with the risograph printer that we have in the studio. So that really impacted the direction I went with my art in the second semester, where now like the majority of the pieces are made up of risograph prints.
For me, I feel like my style itself didn't change, but it did kind of refine, because when I was working on my junior portfolio review, I was studying abroad, and I was in France doing a program in painting. Oh, there you go, perfect. I was painting from life, and I was learning how to, first of all, paint realism faster, but also learn to, as the old saying goes, paint what you see and not what you think you see. And that was really important for moving forward to my November show, because I was able to rely a lot more on my realism because I could do it faster. So in my November show, I had a couple of sculptures, and then I had 2 realistic paintings, and they weren't really connected all that well, I don't think. And also, I had some 3D elements on the 2D paintings, but they weren't really integrated as well as I thought they could have been. So moving forward, I focused a lot more on just wholly from the ground up, building that connection and combining sculpture and 2-dimensional works. And that's how I ended up with my Encounter series of paintings, where the 2D and 3D met.
Fantastic. That's such a great jumping off point for us. So thinking about this process during this journey, I want to follow up about any challenges that you all might face over this last year and how you tackled them and troubleshooted them. So we'll start with Brianne again.
Yeah, so I had a couple challenges. They're more challenges of my own making than anything else, but I think they can be really easy pitfalls for a lot of people. The first of which is that if you've ever met me, I am a perfectionist when it comes to a lot of my work. I tend to spend a lot of time on things that might not end up actually being significant. So like one good example of that is I, during first semester, spent a lot of time working on these like little tiny mushrooms. And I think I made like 200 of them. And I was so precise with them that one of the feedback that I got was like, oh, these look like they were machine made. Because I had spent so much time making sure every single one of them looked super tiny and perfect. And in the grand scheme of things, you maybe saw them for like 2 seconds when you were looking at my work. So that much time definitely could have been spent on other things. And as I said, one of the other big challenges that kind of pulls into the next one for me is time management, just because I am busy. I am 2 majors. I was also on the rowing team for the first part of the semester, so I had a lot of things that were kind of going on and drawing my time. So just in general, kind of juggling all of that caused me some interesting times. And then the other biggest challenge I would say for me is I'm someone who I know what I want to say, but figuring out how to say it in a way that can be applicable to a larger audience or in a way that a larger audience might understand can sometimes be hard for me. So I sometimes need to be better about like taking that step back and thinking like, oh, does this make sense to people who don't know me as much? And so just kind of working through all of that too. Those were some of my biggest challenges.
Yeah, I experienced a lot of challenges. One of the main ones is being very critical of my work, and especially with some of the materials I'm using. I was very indecisive, and I went back and forth. I knew that I wanted these like collage layered elements, but for the life of me, I just couldn't figure out if I wanted to do like more plastic, if I wanted to do more paper, if I wanted to combine them. And that was something I had to learn and realize over time that sometimes you just have to make a choice and stick with it. And of course, working with paper can be difficult in its own way, as it's fragile, and even just the way that I was going about it with the deer. It was something I had never done before, but originally I did want it to be like more interactive. And so I spent a lot of time making these parts that you could physically move, which is really funny because now it is framed and you can't really move it anyway. But yeah, and with the panther, so I like doing like a base of marker, but that wouldn't make much sense because it's so large. That would be too time consuming. So eventually I did more watercolor. And something else I had to realize was for the backgrounds, I wasn't sure if I wanted to work with like more of a canvas background or a paper background. And along the way, I realized that paper worked better for me.
So yeah, a lot of the challenges I faced were surrounded like the process of making the work, especially the amount of time it took. Initially, it took me much longer to conceptualize and figure out like the compositions I wanted for the pieces, which just wasn't sustainable. So I had to find a new process which leaned a lot more on experimentation and play, and just like really getting my hands messy and playing with the pieces of paper that I was using to find the compositions that I was satisfied with. Something that helped me a lot was creating a bank of Riso prints that I could then use to try out different arrangements, and creating a bunch of these 2-inch by 2-inch squares, which made them a lot more streamlined, the process a lot more streamlined, because I didn't have to be making the prints, sealing them, taking them home, cutting them up, and then arranging with them. I had this bank that I could work with, which just made it a lot smoother, and that was a big challenge to begin with.
For me, just like Brianne, the biggest constraint I had was the time that it took to make each work. So in my work, I have a lot of different elements, a lot of different processes that come together to make one work. So it's just extremely time consuming. So the way I fight that is by spending all of my time in my studio. Another challenge that I had was the price of certain elements to my work. So my work I've always wanted to include a multi-sensory technological aspect such as lights or sound. And I'm not an engineer or anything like that. So I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to buy a bunch of stuff and test it out. Luckily, here the art and art department has a scholarship that I was able to get. So I purchased a bunch of different things like projectors and little lights and stuff like that, which is how I ended up with this vibrating sculpture called Grand Unified Theories that's currently up. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing that insight into your process. I think that's a really good stage for us to pivot on the work that you all have currently on view now. So each of you has a very distinctive approach, style, and medium of choice. But it's interesting because it does seem like there were some compelling thematic connections between your work that emerged. In particular, this idea of changing environments. It does seem like each of you, in your own unique way, is either questioning or confronting this idea of the boundaries that exist between an urbanized society, human perception, and the wider world around us. So I want to ask you all what you see as the inherent tensions imposed or tensions that exist in those imposed boundaries, and why was this subject matter particularly compelling for you? We'll go ahead with Brianne again.
So yeah, I think that there is inherently just a lot of tension in that boundary between nature and human, especially in like a boundary of like growth and destruction of like nature's growing things, or like us kind of moving into its space, and just kind of that boundary has its own tension. And kind of what makes that boundary so impactful and like urgent, and why we kind of need to pay attention to it, is that that boundary is getting thinner and thinner and thinner every kind of year as people kind of destroy that kind of careful balance, but just kind of going in and not necessarily being as aware of that space as they need to be. And it's also a very deeply personal issue. So for people who obviously haven't met me, I'm originally from Colorado. I grew up playing in the forest. So my grandparents were park rangers at the Aurora Reservoir. And so I grew up, whenever we would stay with them, we would play in like the forest in their area, and I would enjoy like the hiking with them, biking with them. And a lot of that space has, in the past couple of years, been developed to make nature more comfortable for people to enjoy. And I think that that just idea is something that like we as people need to be aware of, that we can exist within nature, but we also need to actively kind of not destroy that while we do that. I think that's really important. And like, I don't want people to walk away from my art thinking like, oh, don't go outside, don't interact with nature. That's not what I want. I just want people to like get to enjoy being in it and preserving it for generations, so that people like me can also enjoy it, in their future. And yeah, that's why you should pay attention to that.
Yeah, I have always been interested in this tension between the natural and the human world. Of course, because of my personal experiences. I grew up in Central Florida in a somewhat rural area. And of course, like most people, you see a lot of destruction in Florida. You see a lot of property being built, luxury apartments, and huge plots of land being cleared away. And when I was young, I was always taught to value all life, no matter how big, how small, and that we as people should care for nature. It is our responsibility to be caretakers of our environment. And so I'm very much drawing from my memories. And there was a time where I volunteered at a Florida wildlife hospital. And during this experience, I would see a lot of animals come in, mostly due to being hit by cars, a lot of displacement. And that really stuck out to me and stayed with me over time. You can see that was sort of the inspiration for my work, Collision. I wanted to portray a scene where this Florida panther is going to be hit by a car, so that's why it has like a fearful expression. And where it came from, there actually was a Florida panther that lived in my area. And something I find interesting is that people tend to fear these animals, not just panthers, but like alligators. I always see people, especially back home, my neighborhood's Facebook page. There's a gator. People want it out. I understand why. It's a threat. People don't want their pets to be hurt. They don't want to be injured. but I think it's important to have a healthy respect for these animals and to not just fear them, even if they look scary.
Yeah, so the tensions that I see with my work are both political and environmental. With things being so polarized politically, growing up in Florida as a queer individual, I was very lucky that I was in a really accepting space. But since coming to college and being out in the world more, like you see a lot of the polarized political atmosphere in Florida. With the environment like constantly changing and being in a state of overdevelopment, the physical environment, being Floridian, like it's a big concern for me that for the for the humans as well as non-human individuals that live in Florida, continuing to be able to inhabit this space and acknowledging that things are changing politically, not only for the humans that live in Florida, but also the plants and animals.
Okay, I love this question. So I think about, okay, so it's the tension between the boundaries, right? And I think of nature as material reality because what is nature? I extend it to the whole universe and the physical way that the universe works, right? And then I think about the human world, the socially constructed human reality, that we don't think about the material world and this reality of ours. And I believe the tension arises from the fact that not thinking about the material world is so absurd because it's literally our existence of, it's what we're in. We are part of this nature, part of this material world. So, and when I remember to think about it, I feel insane. It's like we're on this giant rock made out of, I don't know, magma and water, and it's hurtling through space. And I go, oh my gosh, why am I not thinking about this more often? And then I feel like I need to resolve that, right? But I also feel insane when I do think about it from the get-go because thinking about these material things is weird, right? And sometimes it's also scary. So me personally, I'm an atheist. So I've never had, or I guess agnostic, I've never believed in ultimate meaning. And when the only thing you have as an absolute truth is that you know nothing, you can kind of consider everything. And so yeah, thinking about the material makes me have these big existential questions come up. And that's what I'm interested in. So yeah, and I also think that, so to illustrate another reason why I'm interested in this topic, I'm going to tell you guys a story, okay? The Epic of Gilgamesh, right, goes back 4,000 years ago, the ancient Sumerians, right? Gilgamesh is the tyrant king, and he's kind of a horrible person. But then his best friend dies, and he has this existential crisis. So he goes on a journey to try to become immortal, which, as we know, is a material impossibility, right? We're biological creatures. We're going to die one day. But because Gilgamesh is living in this world where he's thinking about his human constructed world where our experiences of existence, we're not dead. It's so hard for us to imagine death, so we just ignore it. And at the end of the epic, Gilgamesh obviously fails. He can't be immortal. But then he returns home, and he lives much more authentically when he returns home because he's accepted that he cannot actually cheat death. He's part of this material world. So he's living more authentically. And so that's why I'm drawn to this topic because the boundaries are a hindrance to our lives as human beings, being authentic and making the most of the time we have here. And I believe my art can be like a point of attack against these boundaries.
I think those are great responses and also so relatable in both micro macro ways as well, whether it's the experience of growing up in Florida, living in Florida, or other states, and in proximity to natural spaces, and how much those spaces have changed from when we were younger to what they are now. And then also these big questions about our place in the world as well too. So with some of those big ideas and experiences in mind, I want to ask Brianne, August, and Jules in particular about this hybrid style that you all chose in your work, where combining abstraction while also still alluding to natural forms. And I want to ask how you felt that this approach really helped you communicate some of those big ideas and experiences. Brianne?
Yeah, so for for me, one of the big things, I kind of mentioned it briefly earlier, is that I really wanted to use found objects in my sculptures to kind of be like a physical illustration almost of like environmentalism in art, trying not to create more waste through art and using materials that are destined to either be thrown away or not being used or just kind of don't particularly have a place where they are right now. So again, recycled, reuse, that kind of thing. So that was kind of the first thing for me, was actually like taking an object that wasn't typically what would be used and making that into something. And then the other thing for me too was when I was making my art, I wanted it to be, as I said, understood by a larger audience. So when I originally made this, I kind of based it off of water lilies just because in my own childhood, I grew up, my other grandma had a lot of water lilies in her garden. And me and my sister always would prance around them and play in the water and be like, oh my gosh, we're so cool, we're fairies, like whatever. And that was a very cool experience to me, but I kind of wanted to keep that form like loose so that maybe people who haven't seen water lilies or haven't had maybe similar experiences can kind of apply their own stories onto that of like, maybe they look at it and they see a different kind of flower that relates to them. Like, it doesn't have to be my specific flower, you know? And I just, that way it kind of keeps the message applicable to whoever's seeing the work and they can see it in their own light.
So for my work, I wanted to use Are you going? No. Okay. I was like, I just use abstraction in my work to represent the transformation of landscapes. So all of the risograph prints that I have in my works are scans of paintings that I made representing the Floridian landscape. And through the process of printmaking with the risograph printer, like certain elements and details are lost as it translates the full color paintings into black and white values and then is printed in color again. So by using both like abstracted landscapes within the imagery and also disassembling the prints, not only through the change of when the paintings are scanned and printed, but also through cutting them and making them into smaller pieces, I found the work was more successful in representing the spaces I grew up in Florida. The compositions that I have of the abstracted squares can be seen as windows or grid lines, quilts, lots of different things. So each viewer can take something different away from the work. And I think the abstract nature of the works really helps with that goal.
So abstraction is very important to my concept because, well, especially in my encounter series. So for those not familiar with my artist statement, my encounters are an exploration of something that I've coined the strange, which is basically the feeling that somebody gets when something that they're familiar with, they suddenly feel like it's alien in some way. So as an example, first time, I'm a child and I'm learning about that my body is made of atoms, these things that are these tiny little motes of matter, and they're actually very far apart, even though, in relation to each other. And I'm like, whoa, this thing that I've known my entire life is literally me. Suddenly it's weird to me in this way. So I want people to have this feeling a lot. And since I want people to feel this strangeness more often, I want to take what is mundane and make it strange. So I have these realistic paintings of very mundane scenes or objects, and I use a three-dimensional attachment to the outside of that painting to represent the strangeness I feel, the wonder I feel when looking at mundane things sometimes, and the three-dimensionality of it too, and the abstraction of it. Even though it's not realistic, it's almost hyper-real because there's a flatness obviously to the painting. Even though it's realistic, it's less real because the three-dimensional part is part of our world, right? It's three-dimensional, actually existing within our world. So yeah, and the abstraction helps separate it conceptually from realism.
Yeah, that balance of the 2D, 3D elements is so apparent in your work, Jules. I also want to ask Brianne and August about the ways in which you both use 2D and 3D elements as well. So in your works, you both have elements that extend beyond the 2D surface. You both employ collage as well. What was the motivation behind that compositional choice? Brianne, would you start?
Yeah, so conceptually, I think it really makes sense for my work. Going into this, of course, I like combining 2D and 3D, but I think for me, just the inclusion of a collage element with putting paper on top of paper, it is inherently a fragile material, which I think kind of reflects the fragility of the species that I'm depicting. Um, and I also wanted to include the harmful invasive species in Florida, particularly in the piece Unnatural Beauty. When I was thinking of creating this piece, I wanted to include hyacinth flowers, which are incredibly invasive to the Everglades. Um, and I think just in using collage, it makes these scenes pop out a lot more than if it was just a 2D plane. And that's sort of the point where I want people to look at my pieces and care about these environments. And I think it helps with if it appears to be a scene that you could almost step into and look around. That's sort of the idea with my other piece with the scrub jay and the fawn. Um, I just really enjoy this scene where you could look at it and be like, that's some place where you could look around.
So for my works, when I was working on the three of them, I started with the piece Nest, and that piece is very much inspired by quilt making. So as I was coming to the completion of the piece, I was thinking a lot about the process of applique in quilt making, which is when you have like a bird or a flower, just any object that is placed on top of the quilted background. So part of it is that I followed that structure and then wanted to continue with that process with the other pieces to create a cohesive nature between the works. But I'm also thinking a lot about displacement and construction and things changing in Florida, and in that you can tell that the objects are placed on top of the painted backgrounds if you're close enough to the works, and one might be able to imagine that they could be removed. So thinking of like, what would this look like without the bird or without the nest or without the branches? And how would we see Florida as an environment without the nature? Or to the same extent, how would we see Florida's human environment without certain groups being represented and respected?
Wonderful, thank you. Building off that, even further in the 3D, Brianne and Jules, your work very much includes cultural aspects and cultural elements to it. And I think it's so interesting how intentionally you were about this idea of inviting movement in relation to your work as well. Whether it's the idea of physically moving around the piece, or moving even into it in the case with Jules' installation. So, with that in mind, I wanted to ask what you hope that physical movement of the viewer around the work, what are you hoping to really emphasize the audience with that, Brianne?
Yeah. So I don't know how often y'all go outside or experience nature, but I most of the time you gotta walk or move through the space to kind of actually get to see everything. I mean, nature in and of itself has a lot of movement within it, and I think getting to actually like go through it, whether that's like hiking, walking, you're walking through a botanical garden, you're hiking up a mountain in a lot of my cases. There's a lot of movement to nature, and I wanted my piece to kind of include that like feeling of actually moving through it. So that was really important to me, especially as someone who has experienced nature largely through moving through it. So that was kind of an important connection for me. And I also really want to invite people to be more like active in their participation of it, so that when you're looking at it, like you're moving through it, you're feeling like how it would feel to walk like a field of all of these flowers, like. And it's not just like a single experience, but okay, that's a pretty flower. Like you actually get to be in it and with it and like moving with it. And I think that's a really important part of the experience that nature has been for me, is just it does include that movement aspect.
So for me, this is something I've been thinking about since very early on, when I started thinking about my work as something that was going to be interactive and immersive. And I found that I wanted to avoid what art critic Laurelis Gacko calls a Cartesian dualism, of immersive art, which is just a fancy way of saying people look at a piece of art in a museum and it's so separated from them that they only think about it in like the space of the mind. It's pure concept to them, right? And for me, she was talking about art that's projected light and stuff like that, stuff you can't actually interact with. And I wanted very much to have my art not be separated from the person. So it's referencing back to that idea of boundaries, right? We think of art as this special, specific thing that's different from everything else, but it really is just, more matter, more parts of the environment. So I wanted to emphasize that environmental aspect. So when you go up to my guts sculpture, my grand unified theories, you're supposed to gently put your head inside of it, right? And by doing that, you're in order to complete that action, your body and your brain must understand the size of the head compared to the size of the sculpture. And in doing that, you're kind of creating this mental map of everything that you see. And also in just looking at all the details and all the other sculpture works, even the flatter ones, you're comparing the size of your own body to the work. So in that way, it becomes more real and it feels more like a real environment. And that way, when you leave the museum, I want the concept to kind of come along with that relation so that the concept comes with you and becomes more a part of your real world instead of being separated from you.
I think that idea of active engagement leads well into our next question, which is, when you all are thinking about your art, your process, would you describe the works that are on view as examples of activism or storytelling or potentially both? Brianne.
So yeah, I would definitely say that my work falls under the category of activism, both in like the production of it and what I kind of want you guys to like think about when you leave it. So I really want people to look at my work and actively like think about their impact on nature and the footprint that they leave, especially in regards to like waste or what you're contributing to the environment around us. I mean, that's kind of part of why I am using materials that are being thrown away or recycled, is because I want you to like look at those and be like, oh, maybe there's use in something that I might not find use for. I think that can be something that's really beneficial for people to think about, and I do want that to be there. I also do want people to just in general to think about their own waste and what they're producing, and especially when it comes to like the corporate part of the sculpture, what necessarily all the companies you're using and some of those effects that they have, because there are a lot of companies that have really negative effects on nature. And even if I can just like make you think like, oh, how is the corporation I'm using like impacting the world around us? Is it negative? Is it positive? Is it what has to be there? Is it extreme? Just like, I want you to think about that,
Well, I would say for me, both storytelling and activism, perhaps leaning more on the side of storytelling. For as much as I talk about environmental issues, it is still very personal to me, and I am drawing from my memories. A lot of the references I use are actually from my own photographs and experiences. And though I am concerned with the environment, like when I'm creating these pieces, I'm trying to think of a scene that could possibly happen. So I'm looking at body language, I'm looking at the emotions. I'm also trying to blend these like layered elements so it's all cohesive, such as with the deer, I imagine it's in the forest and it may startle this scrub jay into flying off. And with the panther, I also imagine this darker scene. That's why I give it more of a fearful or timid expression, and it has its tail upright, its paws kind of hesitantly tucked back. And throughout all these pieces, I'm trying to tell a little bit of a story. That's also part of who I am. I really enjoy writing. But at the same time, I think the act of depicting these animals is, of course, a form of advocacy for these species. So in my opinion, I think the story sort of draws people in, and the activism gives the work more of its meaning and purpose.
I would say for my work, I would describe it more as storytelling, as it's meant to represent like an expression of the landscape and environment of Florida through printmaking and collage. I hope that the viewer is able to like engage with these works in that they can recognize their moments in their own lives as mirroring the pictures being depicted, like seeing a bird take off from the water or looking up at tree branches overhead in the landscape. So really, I'm just hoping that the viewer engages with the art in that way and takes it as like these are moments that are not singular and hopefully will continue to happen in Florida.
So I'm thinking about this question kind of in two ways, right? First of all, I kind of think to myself that kind of all storytelling is a kind of activism, but because all stories contain implicit messages, right? What is activism? It's an activation to get you to have a certain kind of thought or a certain kind of do a certain kind of action, right? So even the most inane of stories like TikToks and like reality TV, in some part, kind of put some ideas in our head, or we incorporate their implicit messages into our models of understanding the world. But if we're thinking about like intentional activism, intentional storytelling, I can think of it as, yes, my art is probably more activism, despite the fact that I often incorporate stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, or in this current work, the Roman philosopher Lucretius. I think I'm so focused on getting people to kind of just think about questions that is more like activism. Yeah.
I think you all have done a good job of touching on some of the takeaways that you're hoping that the audience will have and some of those emotional responses. So I wanted at this point to actually turn our attention to what comes next. So now that your journeys as an undergraduate are about to come to an end, and as we look within this program to sort of shift towards the end of the program, I want to ask you all what you see moving forward, what you see as the future of your artistic practice. Brianne.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue. And that is scary, and I will admit that. I am someone who I have ideas of what's next in my life at least, but especially with a lot of those questions that come with graduating, like what exactly is next. I have details, but like, and especially because I don't know everything how that is all going to work out yet. I'm not quite sure how my artistic practice is going to evolve with that. I know that I want to keep making art at the end of the day, and I know that over the summer I will probably have some opportunities, just like I did this summer, to make art for others. So I know that I'll get to kind of maybe continue that aspect of some like the 3D sculptural stuff. But more than that, I don't know. I could end up moving more with like the digitally stuff, just because I will always have a computer. I could end up making a ton more art out of like thrifted things, and it's an exciting possibility. So who knows?
Well, I have a small clue. I think that obviously I will continue to make art no matter what I do throughout my life. Going forward, probably I want to experiment, but also do what I enjoy, because I think ultimately doing art should be something that you like to do, not something that you force yourself to do. And I do like the themes I'm dealing with human and animal relationships. I would be interested in focusing more on the human aspect of things in the future. I'm also open to experimenting with other materials. I briefly experimented with using live plants, and that was a really interesting and fun experience that I wouldn't mind revisiting. I would also love to do more sculptural works with clay, but I think ultimately I don't have the clearest picture of what I am going to be doing after graduation. Hopefully all good things, but I think part of the unknown is a little bit of exciting because, I don't know what happens next. Hopefully it's good.
Yeah, similar to Brianne and Capernia, I don't know for sure what my artistic practice will be like in the future, but I am really excited to get back into working with textiles and quilt making. I've been wanting to experiment with dyeing fabrics for a long time, and I just recently was able to get some materials for that. So I'm excited to see what kind of projects I can do using those materials. I'm just really excited to be making work outside of the academic sphere in the future, making work for myself and for my family, and getting to continue that process of experimentation and play.
I am looking forward to improving my realism. I know I mentioned that I had an entire program studying painting realistically, but I feel like I can get better. So I want to be like photorealistic and learn about the world through my painting. And also I'm thinking about making like tiny little sculptures that people can buy on my website, like little dragons or something. I think that'd be fun. And I want to have people commission portraits for me. That's actually one of my favorite things to paint is other people, especially from life. And people really seem to like that. So that's something I'm going to develop for sure. Career-wise, I'm thinking about maybe concept art. So working with an animation or video game company because I really like designing characters and that kind of thing. Also maybe biological illustration. I took a paleo art course when I was in high school, and I love drawing dinosaurs, so I would love to do that professionally. Yeah.
That's great. It's so interesting because I think so much of what you all are saying ties so well into your comments about the journey of this past year as well. That idea of moving forward and continuing to play, explore, experiment, and test out. And I'll also say that not knowing for sure what you're going to do next is totally legitimate and fair. There's so much time. Last but not least, my final question is if you all have any advice for undergraduate artists who may be about to begin their own journey here at Rollins College. Brianne.
So yeah, my number one advice would be learn from my follies. Figure out your time management earlier rather than later. I'm time management not my strong suit, and I think that my art would have benefited a lot more if I would have been maybe a little better about spending smaller chunks of time with my art rather than like what I normally do, which is like I spend 2 weekends or I'll spend like the whole weekend in there, so I'll be in there for like 12 hours in like 2 days. And I think sometimes you can get really pigeonholed by doing that. And then also I think if you're like better about just pacing it out, you're less likely to burn yourself out and you have more time to think about it and reflect on the ideas and just let everything stew. So that would be my number one advice is just manage your time.
Yeah, I have a lot of advice. I would say to not be overly critical of your work. That is something that has held me back a lot. For a long time, I experienced heavy art block. I had no motivation to create art. I even started to dislike art. But this year, I found myself starting to fall in love with making art again, which has been really a great experience for me. And for people coming in, I would just say, if you're a bit of a perfectionist and you're very critical of your work, I would just say to maybe let things go and be okay with making mistakes, be okay with failing. You're not always going to get it right. And be open to experimenting. And if things are uncertain, that's okay because college is a time to make those mistakes. And I think a lot of the most important development in my work came from maybe not fully succeeding at an idea, but these moments are just as valuable as a finished piece. There's no perfect artwork. So I think maybe if it's a little cliche, you should just enjoy the journey.
My biggest piece of advice is to lean on your peers that are also going through the experience of whether it's the JPR or the or the senior year studios and seminars. Just really value those relationships and take the opportunity to speak with your peers when you're creating work, not only in critique, but also just outside of class and when you happen to be in the studio at the same time. Some of the best feedback that I've gotten on my work has been from my peers, and I'm just like so thankful that I've been able to have those conversations throughout the year. So just make sure that you're taking advantage of the fact that there are people that are going through the same thing as you, even though they're making different art, because we're all in this together. We gotta support each other.
My biggest piece of advice is to get really good at sending emails to people because I found so many times that is really helpful to meet with the studio art faculty about any questions you have about especially material issues. There have been so many times where I'm like, oh, I shouldn't bother this person about this. And then I bother the person about it and I learned something new that really helps me in my work. And if I hadn't done it, so early on, I would be behind. And now I have this incredible thing to work towards. Like for instance, in my November show, I made this mask that was hanging from the ceiling that you could look through. But when I first got it, it was just like this disc of wood, and I was like, I don't know how to put the eye holes in. So I asked our sculpture professor, Audrey Hope, and she was like, yeah, you can use this power tool called the Dremel. I hadn't heard of a Dremel before, and she showed me how to use the chisels and stuff like that. So I could do it. And then throughout the whole rest of the semester and then this semester, I have been using the chisels and the Dremel all the time. So if I hadn't done that, my work would be totally different and worse. So yeah, just email people and don't be afraid to ask them for help because, that's why they're there. They're there to help you learn and put on a good exhibition and make your art better. So yeah.
Fantastic. I want to thank you all so much for sharing insight and background in your piece. It enriches our engagement with it and viewers so much. We have about 10 minutes left in the program, so I want to open it up to the audience at this point and invite any questions that you all may have for the artists here. There is a question in the back. Yes, go ahead.
You have been evolving and growing over the course of your journey here, presumably since you started making art process. So what I'm most curious about, I've heard a bunch of ideas, what specific aspect or method or whatever about your art you enjoy the most? What about the process? What about the creation? What about the elements that you put into it? Is there something specific or broad strokes that you enjoy most? Because when I make art, I feel deeply something. I don't know what it is, but I feel something.
Yeah, great question. So, Jules, I'm going to pick up the mic.
Yes, I enjoy most realistic painting, I think. It's just really fun to me. And I totally get what you're saying about like feeling that something. Like every time I paint realistically, I'm like, yes, this is so fun. And when I make the sculptural elements, to me, that's more stressful. But I have to push myself to do that because I like the result a lot. But yeah, realistic painting.
I would say it's the challenge of just getting to like have an idea and then the creating to the final process. Like that's what brings me joy. Like I love coming up with these outlandish ideas that may or may not ever physically work. And then trying to like piece together, okay, like what of that actually works? Like and playing with it and like getting my hands on the material and actually like seeing what I can make happen with my own skills.
There's something about the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love getting consumed by the process. I think my favorite part, honestly, is doing the small details that maybe you might not notice from far away, but when you get closer, I love adding like little details, like a bit of glitter in the eyes to make them appear more alive, and just like the thin brushstrokes of fur. I don't know, something about like making it appear alive just does something for me.
For me, I love the collage aspect of the work, especially on my piece Canopy with all the different branches. those textures that you see on the final piece started out just as vertical striped risograph prints, and I got to tear them up, and then it's just like it's such a fun process. It's like putting together a puzzle in a way because pieces just like seem to find their home through the process, and that's definitely my favorite part is getting to mess with the glue and put everything where it needs to go.
Thank you. Okay, you have anything? Yeah.
So a lot of you work with a ton of different mediums that are all just super freaking cool. But what's a medium that you haven't worked with yet that you might want to work with in the future to like translate any new ideas or current ideas that you're thinking about?
Love that question. So yeah, any medium that you're sort of thinking about, we would love to test out. Yeah, go for it.
Hey, I really want to work with like lights and like on those like little the translucent cables that like you see like people use those like party things for, because like the way that light hits those, and I feel like you could do a lot of really fun with like illusions and stuff and interactive like illusions and stuff, and I'm looking forward to. I want to work with them, but we'll see when that happens.
I'm really hoping to get back into ceramics. I took a ceramic class one summer a while ago, and I had so much fun with it, but I wasn't able to really pursue it. So I'm excited to be back in St. Petersburg and with those studios in the area to be able to engage with that process and the medium as well.
Yeah, I want to try, when you burn the wood burning. Yes, I want to try that. That'd be fun.
Yeah, like I said, I would also just working with living material. Kind of similar. I think wood carving would be pretty cool.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead. So something that I've noticed all of the technicians is they all use multiple words. If you had unlimited time and money, add one more word to your presentation, so any ideas of what that's interesting. So maybe something you all hoping to do, kind of realize.
So when I first like wanted to create this exhibition, I had this idea of this giant tunnel made of fabric that's kind of like filled with lights and fluorescent paints that are all lit up, and that's what I would do. I would make an environment you can walk into, not just stick your head inside.
Yeah, I have kind of a similar answer actually. If I had unlimited time and unlimited money, I would just love to make a very immersive, three-dimensional space. Everywhere you look is the art. That'd be really cool.
Sure. I think I would just like make more flowers at the end of the day. It's just fill like an entire floor, like side wall with just nothing but the flowers, and it would be overwhelming but also like fun, like you look at it and you'd be like, so many flowers. It'd be cool.
I would love to just get really big with the art and just use like the biggest piece of paper possible and do something similar with the sort of visual language I have going on. I'd love to do that in the future and just sort of experiment with scale.
I would love to know what the world would look like if artists had that. I think it's a great note to end on. I want to thank the artists again so much for sharing so much, both personal and specific to the art as well about your process, the materials you chose, the work that are on you. Now, I also want to thank everyone who attended today, both in person and virtually as well. The exhibition Flux will be on view until May 10th of this year. We have our second panel this Thursday, same time, same place, with the other 5 artists that are featured in the exhibition. So I invite you all to come back and join us on Thursday. And with that, I just want to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much for coming.